Hello, everyone. This is another Freedom to Feel conversation. And my guest today, again, is the lovely Dr. Christine Silverstein. She's a peak performance coach, founder of the Summit Center for Ideal Performance. She is a behavioral health registered nurse, a clinical hypnosis expert. Dr. Christine is also a researcher, published historian, and the best-selling author of Wrestling Through Adversity, Empowering Children, Teens, and Young Adults to Win in Life. So this is my brief introduction. As always, there's a lot more to you, Christine, and the full bio will be at the end of this video and also on the podcast notes. So the topic of today is battle up. You cannot hit the ball if you don't swing the bat. And that was by Babe Ruth. He was a famous baseball player. So just as an introduction, Christine, why this metaphor? Talk to me about this. How can we apply the metaphor in real life on a daily basis?
Well, baseball metaphors are often used also on the wrestling mat. You know, I work with wrestlers. And so we can learn from Babe Ruth that you have to swing the bat to hit the ball. Right. You'll never get score a home run or anything in life unless you're proactive getting what you want and setting your goal to be a winner. So that's right. It's very common, I think, metaphor, and I think Babe Ruth meant it to be that way.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I guess the question that comes to me is, why do so many of us hesitate or become almost afraid of our own wishes, of our own desires and longing in life?
Well, I believe it has to do with your past, how you brought up, your traumas from the past, or what somebody said to you. And it's been my experience. I work with adults as well as children, teens, and young adults. And for instance, this one physician, he was a surgeon and a very good surgeon. And he was having difficulty passing his residency exam. So to go into the hospital of choice in New York City rather than out someplace in a rural area because he didn't score well on the exam. So he came to me and he had failed the exam 3 times. And he didn't really know why, because he was such a skilled surgeon and so kind, cared about his patients. So we worked together and I taught him the basic mindful toughness skills. But we went into the zone back in time. I call it looking back to the future.
Yeah.
And during that time, he saw himself in the classroom when he was in the 5th grade.
Yeah.
And his parents were talking to the teacher, and he was there, and they were saying things like, oh, he doesn't do very well in school. He'll probably never make a success of himself, things like that. At least that's how he perceived it when he was in the 5th grade. And his father was a surgeon as well, right? So this came into the viewer, of how he perceived his life, but he didn't remember that experience cognitively. It was only when he got in the zone and we went back in time through a very simple technique, actually something that Freud created before he turned to free association. So that experience, seeing himself in the past on like a split screen on the left side, he's like in a movie theater, and he's projecting it onto the screen in his mind's eye. And then he sees himself and he's 5 years, he's in the 5th grade and he's wondering, it's like, oh my gosh, I'll never make anything of myself. But he didn't remember that he was thinking that way or feeling that way. So then on the left side of this split screen that we created, he sees that moving off into the distance, getting to be black and white, getting to be smaller and smaller and drifting away. And then on the right side of the split screen, we created a scenario. Well, now he's a surgeon, and he's going in for his exam, and he's very knowledgeable, and it's very close up, colorful, and he can believe that. So that's one of the things, besides study skills and thinking of yourself and projecting into the future, and mental recalling all the great surgeries he did to save people's lives, right? So that helped on the right side of the screen. And then we worked with other aspects of mindful toughness skill sets, and he not only passed his exam, but he said it was just like going to play a golf game. It was so
Yeah.
much fun to
Yeah.
take the exam. He scored very high, and he got his residency in New York City, just where he wanted. So that's an idea, that he was not aware of what was blocking him. And so once he realized what it was, and that could be the initial event. It's called the initial sensitizing event, but there could have been many others that came after that or before that occurred. But that was the one that popped up in his mind, came to view, and that's the one we could work with. And so no more feeling like I'm in the fifth grade when he is highly educated, and now he has a family to support, because being resident, sometimes you're in your mid 30s, as was his case, and he had to, move on with his education, but he didn't want to move his family to a rural area out,
Right.
in the boonies, because they lived in the New York City area.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. You see, it's stories, they really play a huge role, right? Because if somebody else
Yes.
did it, then that means we can do it too. So that's
Yes, you
wonderful to
can do
hear
it.
that.
And it's relatively easy once you know how to do it. And it's called technically the affect bridge technique that I use,
Mm,
and it's very effective. It was used even during World War II, to have the soldiers and the military go back to their post. And it's a simple thing. It's quick. People think, oh, I know I have to go to psychoanalysis for like 10 years.
right.
No,
Right,
it's
right.
very quick. It could be done in a couple of sessions. But if you have the deep traumas, it's always best to work with somebody like me, who knows what to do to help you. But then once you learn it, you can use it for all the things in your life to transform your life on
Wow.
your own. Hmm.
Wow, Christine. That's part of the hypnosis approach. Is that within that
Yes,
umbrella? It is, right?
yes, yes. Hmm.
So a question that I have for you is that for children, I know there are benefits for children to start doing that, kind of benefiting from hypnosis, or the
Yes.
mindful toughness skill sets.
Hmm.
And I wonder if in children, if these techniques can actually detect blockages even before they
Hmm.
kind of take over our minds or their minds.
Yes, yes. It's very important. We have a tendency in our society, like, just to use gun violence,
Yeah.
for example, because there's so much trauma associated with that. Say you witnessed it in elementary school, even kindergarten, these days. And so, oh, but they're just young and they'll forget, and you don't want to
Yeah.
make them cry or whatever, and you don't really help them to work through it so that they can heal. It's very important, in my opinion, to work on it as soon as
Mm,
possible, and maybe just initially to decrease the anxiety and the stress related to it, but also to see yourself working through it, so in the future you're not traumatized like this doctor was, and he didn't know it, and that was blocking him. So you
yeah.
could have a matter of fact, in the essence of it, when you think about the overall picture, people who experience gun violence, they may not finish high school. They have
Mm,
lower socioeconomic benefits, and loss of job, loss of confidence in themselves, all as a result of the gun violence. So that's been proven scientifically. So we need to work with it as soon as possible. At
yeah.
first, just to help with the anxiety, and to help, with some initial counseling, but then to help them release it so that they can grow up and use their power Like you see some of the advocates now who were involved in gun violence earlier in high school, and now they're big advocates after they graduate from college.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, that's a beautiful vision. Have you tried to bring this approach to high schools or even elementary schools?
Well, yes, I've talked about it actually on two TV news
Mm,
programs.
yeah,
One after the main shooting, I was asked to come on and speak about what parents can do and what you can do to help children who experience gun violence. That one took place at a bowling alley, and it
yeah,
was a teenage night out to bowl, with their fathers and with the coach. And it was in Maine, and they didn't expect to have such violence there. So they had other issues. The shooter was still out there. They hadn't caught him yet or found him yet, because he
right,
was dead when they found him. But so they were on lockdown. So it was up to the parents what to do, because there was no vigil yet. There was no social worker or psychologist to speak to the children. So the
yeah,
parents had to learn what to do. And the first thing, of course, is to know yourself and to settle with yourself what you know and how you feel, so you can help your children. So I spoke for about 10 minutes on that interview. It's on my YouTube channel on The Young Navigator. And also I was in Pennsylvania after the shooting, which occurred with the teenagers shooting at each other after the
mm,
Super Bowl, during the Super Bowl parade. So I went to Pennsylvania and spoke about that there as well. Because there's so much ramification after a
right,
shooting that
right,
affects the health and welfare of the students and we realized that that's the first reason why they have anxiety from the ages of 8 to 24. And we have to be aware
yeah,
of that. That's the first cause of death of our children.
yeah. Have you thought about creating an app that could communicate directly with children and young adults?
I've thought about it. I am working on several apps. I've one for my book.
Yeah,
And also a website to get the word out. But
yeah,
I do have a TV video that I made some years ago called Winning Ways for Teens, and directly talking to them, but also showing parents how they can work with their young athletes or their teenagers who have emotional issues like anxiety challenges, or even a father saying, "Oh, my son, I wish he was a hockey player, but soccer, that's okay. But what do I do with my son? He's not reaching his potential." So there are some
right.
interviews on that. And they're also listed, sections of that interview are listed on the Young Navigator site, the YouTube site. But yes, I have many times gone right out onto the wrestling mat, right out into the playing field, and talked to the student
Mm,
athletes what
yeah,
to do. So that was from like day one when I started my work in 1996. So I'm very familiar with that, talking right to them, but also the coaches need to know what to do,
right.
and
That's
also the
true.
parents, who we talked about that for a whole session. Sports can be, an elixir, or can be a toxin, depending on how you look at it.
Yes, it could go both ways. When I read this, what you wrote here, body, mind, spirit, and emotion. I don't know why, but when I looked at the word emotion, the word soul came to me.
Hmm.
So, do you see the connection between emotions, feelings, and the soul?
Well, I see the connection, um, because I work with both sides of the brain. I call it a
Mm,
whole brain approach. So I connect to the right side of the brain, where we do a lot of visualization, connect to emotion in the amygdala, with relating to the soul. I call it sometimes spirit. That's what I
yeah,
call spirit. Like
yeah,
to wrestlers, I say, that's your spirit, and that's the core. I point to the chest, that's the core of you. That's the belief in yourself. And that's where all your skills are stored, right? So you have to value them, even
yeah.
if they didn't work on a particular situation. You got taken down, but you believe in yourself, you're going to put it on the feedback loop and figure out what to do the next time around so you score. So
Yes.
that, in essence, is the spirit or the soul, and emotion is connected with that, I do believe, because we leave that out. We leave that out
Yeah.
when, like, a coach would be talking to you, but emotion is a big part of it, whether you'll win or you won't win, because it has to do with confidence. It has to do with belief in yourself, and also has to do, of course, with skill level. But you could have the greatest skills in the world, but still fail
Mm,
because you
mm,
don't have the mind, body, spirit, the holistic viewpoint about your sport, like the sport of wrestling. So I think that has to be right there. But emotion is what I include in the feedback loop. So it's looking at, what did you do in the baseball field? How did you execute it? How did it work? Did you strike out?
mm.
Did you
Yeah.
score? And then you come around to say, what do I have to do to improve? But in the middle of that feedback loop, as we discussed, I have these questions. So what was I feeling when I was
Mm,
performing? What
right.
was I thinking? And those two things will determine how well you do, or how well, or whether you're successful or not. But there's also that other aspect, is that there'll be some success. Maybe, you tipped off the ball, and you almost, you almost got a hit, but you didn't, or, contacted the ball. Or maybe on the wrestling mat, you got into your opponent, but you couldn't finish off your move. So it's not as if there's nothing you did correctly,
Mm,
especially if you're trained to do those skills, but you look at it emotionally as, I suck, I'm bad at this, I must be really bad, I'm really stupid. So that's the emotion that we're talking about, that
mm,
you have to look at those things and say, well, what can I do to improve? Because every time you do a skill and if you think you can do it and you feel confident, you'll do it. And if you think about things in your life and you say, I wasn't feeling good about myself, I thought I was going to lose, well, then you lose. You're like a prophet, right? You're
yeah.
prophesizing, what's going to occur. Hmm.
Mm. I have heard people say happy people do well in life,
Hmm.
and that is so true. And that is connected to emotions and feelings. And
Hmm.
then go back to the soul, spirit
Hmm.
aspects of our being. And you're right. We have, for some reason, when it comes to becoming a professional and having a career or in sports,
Hmm.
we have
Hmm.
forgotten that, kind of left that aside,
Hmm.
although it's the foundation in a way for
Hmm.
everything.
And I think, I know we're talking today about poverty and lower socioeconomic conditions. Well, you're raised that way
Mm,
in poverty, and it's really challenging for you to think otherwise, almost like you don't deserve to be wealthy. You have what I call poverty consciousness rather than prosperity
mm,
consciousness. And it's because of your upbringing. You really don't believe it's bad. It might even be bad to be wealthy. With the way people learn that in their faith, taught by the ministers, that it might be bad to be rich, which I
yeah.
disagree with totally, because wealth isn't just, an abundance isn't just having money.
Mm. Ah, yeah, it's not just about that. That's
Hmm.
true. Those are the they call the myth or the misconception, misunderstandings, right, about
Hmm.
life. I have heard about money. I think my husband used to say that. Oh, money is evil. Is that something like that? It's a quote that says money is the
Hmm.
cause of all evil, something like this.
And then you're not able to even imagine yourself as being
Mm,
wealthy. As I said, abundance goes way beyond that, and you can't see yourself maybe get that position at your job, that makes more money. You're not able to
yeah.
advance in your career,
Mm,
or maybe you missed the opportunity to go to college when you were really smart, but you didn't believe that you were smart. Like the doctor, thank goodness he didn't believe that in a
yeah.
medical school, but he couldn't pass his exam.
Yes.
Hmm.
You mentioned something, an interesting concept of the growth of the mind. That's interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, talk to me about that. I love the concept, the name in itself.
Yes, well, that was the title of a book by Dr. Stanley Greenspan. He wrote it in 1997, and he's no longer with us, I
Right.
believe. However, I think that has the most important information that perhaps because it was written in the 20th century, we discard. In
Right.
research,
Right.
they say even if you're writing a research paper in college, you have to use the most recent knowledge. You don't go back to, something written,
Mm,
20 or 30 years ago. But I use things frequently because I'm a historian, and that's all about going back in time, no matter what the date. It could be like the 1600s, and you're still going back there. So, so I read his book, and I was so impressed with it because he was a psychoanalyst as well as a child psychiatrist, and he had great methods. We sat down and talked to children, and had made great progress with them, even children who are on the autism spectrum. He believed in them, that they could be
uh,
leaders, and
mm,
he also gave these principles that we should use and know about as adults, and how to provide what the children need. And as long as they have those concepts, and they incorporate them into their lives, they can achieve anything they want,
mm,
including those, as I said, on the autism spectrum, or those who have other health challenges. So his idea was that you can be mentally healthy even if you have certain challenges with mental health, like you've been
mm,
in a hospital and been treated and you're on medication. And he said that empathy
mm,
was
mm.
progress. And
Yeah.
if you have empathy for others, then you're better off than the person who doesn't, who actually has the mental disorder. So that's how he divided it. And he gave two examples. One was of Paul and one was of Sylvia. And he explained that. And I have a section of that in my book. So
Wow.
he said you have to be um, helping these kids with empathy, compassion, showing them what to do, believing in them, and that you have to work in community, and that you
Mm.
can't do it all alone. Very few parents know exactly what to do, because your children don't come with instruction manuals,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
one child can differ from the other, so
Yeah.
whatever you knew for child number one, it would be different. Like, for example, my son, when he was born, he was born in allergy season, and I didn't know, until he was older, that he had allergies. But when he was first
Yeah.
born, he wouldn't sleep, and I had to rock him and breastfeed him. And so my daughter came along a couple of years later, and we're riding home in the car, and she's in the car seat, and she's not saying any, crying, or she's just there looking. And my husband said to me, "There's something wrong with our daughter. Look, she's just sitting there." she's
Oh.
she's not yelling, she's not screaming, she's not trying to get out of the car seat. So so I said, no, that's
Uh,
just her personality. It's just different. All right. So I had to approach her in a different way. And it wasn't just because she was a female and he was a male. It was just they still today have different personalities.
yes. Empathy, that's a big one, Christine. That's a yeah, to me that comes first. Yeah, when we
Yes.
talk about mental health, I remember when I was into the fitness thing, the competition, and I looked very healthy and all this. I ate really
Hmm.
well, but I was not happy and I was not empathic. I was not
Hmm.
really having self compassion for myself or
Hmm.
others. And that, after my healing process, I just let go of all that. And then I
Hmm.
had to heal myself, get to understand myself. That came as a message. So, what is to be healthy? And then the message was, is to be loving, is
Hmm.
to be
To care
compassionate.
about other people, to have compassion for those who have less, and
Yeah,
to work in community, and to learn how to do that as a child. And who's going to teach you that but adults, right? So we have to remember that, because
yeah,
there's such a thing as mirror neurons, and our children mimic everything and and we're the role models. So we have to be conscious of that, that what we say, what we do, that will be reflected in our children. And if it's not positive, if it's negative, it's like you don't care about your neighbor and you call your neighbor names.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
when I had an issue in one of the homes I lived in New Jersey with a tree, I was trying to save this tree. My neighbor didn't like the tree because it dropped acorns on his pool cover. And so
Right.
we had a violent storm, and one branch fell on the pool cover and tore it a little bit. And he came over to my house, and he was inebriated, and he was cursing, and the trees were swaying, and the wind and everything. And he
Yeah.
approached me almost to punch me, right? But I just told him, listen, these oak trees will provide oxygen for your children for their entire
Mm,
lives,
mm,
right? And
mm.
then he backed away and he left. But that was really challenging because the fight continued into a lawsuit all the way, for years later, which at the end I called the tree in question courage. Courage survived, right? It's still
Mhm,
standing, more
mhm.
than 25 years later because of my intervention. So, but that's the idea that people, that was my neighbor, my next door neighbor, and not very neighborly, I would say, and wasn't open to discussion about anything or how you felt. Um, and that I did have the tree evaluated by an arborist. It wasn't as if I just totally ignored an unhealthy tree. So
Yeah.
uh, he
Yeah.
wasn't open to that because he had his mindset. And so you have to watch. He had several children. And so what are they thinking? What will they do in the future? And how will they behave? So you have to watch it and understand yourself, know yourself before you speak, because your children are picking these qualities up, very positive ones if you're acting that way as well. And that makes for a good citizen.
Yes. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
God. Yes, that's another powerful example. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's unfortunately very common, right? I
Mm-hmm.
hear those things a lot. It seems like it's easier. There's many ways to be unkind, but there's just
Mm-hmm.
one way to be kind, to be loving, isn't it? To just
Mm-hmm.
open the heart, be
Mm-hmm.
present, and
Mm-hmm.
come from love. There's just really one
Yes,
way
it
to do
comes from
that.
love. And sometimes people question you if you're kind. They say, this is suspect. It's like, why are you
Yeah.
so kind to me?
Mm,
When
oh,
I
yeah. Yeah.
worked in real estate and I told my colleague that there was a house for sale that would be good for her client, right? And she said, why are you telling me that? Why are you saying that to me? Like she thought I was trying, I don't know what she thought I was trying to do, but I was
Yeah.
just being kind and thoughtful that maybe her client would enjoy that home.
Yeah. So it's coming from trauma too. Yeah. Those
Hmm.
imprints, right, of pain.
Hmm.
So now we are not even open to receive love. I think that's
Hmm.
another one. It's a big one.
Yes.
And then that's, yeah. When we speaking of community, then it would be really, really a challenge to live in community or to be in community if we can't receive.
That's right. And I think that's where we're having a challenge today in our society. It's us against them, and you're just not open to
Yeah.
share who you are and where you come from and who you love. And it's so much of a challenge. It's us against them.
Right. I had a hard time during the election and just seeing the division again.
Hmm.
Could not believe, how the hatred and then the fear. It's
Hmm.
clear to me it's coming from fear and collective trauma and all that. And then
Yes.
I was kind of almost having this tendency to take aside too. I noticed
Hmm.
with the mind, they're like, oh, I would love for her to win. And then I started to see Trump in a almost like an adversary, an opponent.
Yes.
And then I
Hmm.
noticed the movement within the mind and then changed that. Now it's changed. Now I see him with a lot of compassion before he won the election. So I
Hmm.
started to change the view of the mind, the
Hmm.
perception of the mind, coming from love.
Well, coming from love, and love is a perception in itself. So, is it really coming from love, or is it based on facts that aren't proven,
Mm,
about your behavior? So, but it's perception. It's all perception. So it's what you see, what you believe. So I'm not one to come along and say, you shouldn't believe this or that. You have to be neutral, because I
Yeah.
could understand, like you, both sides of the story. But I do question whether some of the antics, like talking about the people from Puerto Rico as if they're garbage, that really hit home hard for me, because
Yeah.
you shouldn't talk about a whole race, and these are people who live there, like that. So we have to, sometimes you align with something that's not very friendly,
Mm.
and then even promote that, even if you are an immigrant yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. That's another one, right? I come across all this information, the news and all that. When my husband talks to me about it, I don't watch those things. But it's interesting to see. It feels to me like what happens a lot of times that we start to almost to resonate with what lean towards something that resonates with our energetic field in the sense of the
Hmm.
mental construct, the way we think
Yes.
and our perceptions. So maybe that's what it is too. And when we have figures like that, two people with
Hmm.
these powerful personalities, and then
Yes.
it's funny how we start to become inclined to. But I'm very, yeah, I'm very conscious of that. So I watch
Hmm.
everything, the movements of the mind
Yes,
going one
you
way or
watch
another.
the performance like I do. I
Yeah.
That's how I even watch sports. I'm looking,
Mm,
okay, so what is that person going to do? And oh yes, that's what I thought, because I could feel the energy. What
yeah.
was that person thinking, believing when he's standing, at the free throw line on the basketball court, and sure enough, the ball goes in the net and he
Uh-huh.
scores.
Yeah.
So yes, you can pick up the energy, and also you can be persuaded because the person has the skill to align with you. And that's really what I do, because all my work is about talking. I don't have any
Yeah.
product to
Yeah.
sell,
Yeah.
but my work is about being positive and directing my clients in a positive direction, and helping them, like the doctor, to pass his exam. So that's not always the case. So you do have to watch who you're working with, because you can go in a negative direction.
Mm,
And even it's like what was done with Hitler in the group hypnosis was that people were willing to kill Jews. And, that was the belief that it's okay to do that. So we can go in a very negative direction, as history proves. And,
right.
and, um,
Right.
and these were maybe loving, kind, Catholics over there in Germany, but they went in that direction, and then there's
Mm,
no going back. So we have to be aware of that.
mm. Especially in times of challenging times,
Mm-hmm.
because the mind is more open and it's sort of more
Mm-hmm.
receptive to
when you're
direction,
in
guidance.
fear, when you're in fear, it's more open. And that
Right.
is true with everybody. Then you'd be willing to listen and more open. For instance, my husband, he had compound fractures in his leg. He broke his
Mm,
leg in three places. The bone literally protruded through his leg and through
yeah.
his jeans right onto
Yeah.
the sidewalk. And he was bleeding, and his leg was all twisted, right? So he and the police officer came with the ambulance, and he said, let me straighten out that leg. It looks so crooked, right? And I screamed. I got in front of my husband on the ground. I said, no,
Yeah.
I'm a nurse. You could
Yeah.
introduce infection. You could damage nerves. He could lose his leg. He could lose his life from septicemia by doing that, because he was on the ground. He is outside. And so what you think might be right may not be right.
Mm,
You don't have
mm,
the medical knowledge to say so. So anyway, he didn't straighten out his leg, thank goodness. And
yeah.
his leg healed after this great surgeon helped him, but not necessarily right away, until I helped him use the power of his mind, because he was so fearful that he would need a bone graft, and it would only be successful, the doctor told him, 40% of the time.
Yeah.
So being an engineer, he said, well, I'll be in that group for sure, 40%. And I said, no, here, I'll make an audio tape for you, and you'll be able to heal your leg along with the doctor and the surgery. And so that's what he did. But he was so fearful that he listened to me for a change, right?
Yeah.
Usually he would say, no, I don't believe you. I don't
Yeah.
believe that nonsense. But he was so fearful. He listened to me and he helped to heal his leg.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's an interesting story too, right? Which is a true story. So fear can open us up to both ways,
Mm-hmm.
for
Yes.
goodness and also for
Yes. Mm-hmm.
not so good things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Mm-hmm.
good example of that. The police trying to do that, and that was out of fear, trying to correct something, but it could
Mm-hmm.
have kind of worse. And then your husband being open to be
Mm-hmm.
healed in a spiritual. It's
Mm-hmm.
nothing. It's really holistic. It's just
Mm-hmm.
access and tapping into all aspects of being.
Yes, and that's why I say all healing takes place body, mind, spirit, and emotion.
Yes,
Hmm.
which is innate. It's right here. It's available to
Hmm.
all of us.
Hmm.
We're all whole. We have all the tools.
We have the tools, we just don't know how to use them. Hmm.
Right, right. So thank you.
And maybe nobody taught us. Nobody taught us how to use
Yeah,
them. But your wounds heal. You get a little cut on your finger, when you're a little kid, and,
yeah,
and your mom says, "Oh, I'll kiss your boo boo," you know, and it heals, right? We all
yeah.
have that.
Mm,
So you have to align with the physician, align with yourself, and that will promote healing. Even blood flow within the bone, within the circulation of my husband's leg
yeah.
promoted the circulation, which I felt his leg was very cold at night, very cold around that time. And I knew I had to improve the circulation, which I did, and also other things that I did with imagery to help him to heal. And it was
Mm,
just a recording that I made, that he listened to in the carpool back and forth to work because he couldn't drive.
yeah. Gosh. Yes, what's not to love about that? You kind of inspired me to say something funny. I thought about you as the nurse of life, because you just tapping into all the aspects. Like it would
Mm-hmm.
be depicting this picture of a nurse that is in touch with herself,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
all the aspects of herself, and then she's passing that wisdom on to others. It really would be a wonderful book. Think about it, Christine, the nurse of life. Huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of a nursing theory. You're supposed to know yourself. And that's on the Temple of Apollo. I saw it myself when I was there in Delphi in Greece. And to know yourself first before you work with your clients, and then you can help them to heal. That's how you help them to heal. Hmm.
That's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Hmm.
Yeah. For bringing the timeless wisdom here to our reality. So there's something else that you talked about that really, I didn't know about this term of pathogenic. Yes, I had heard, but not
Salutogenic.
salutogenic. I didn't even know how to pronounce that.
Yes. Yes, that's a term by someone who wrote a book on salutogenesis,
Yeah.
which is
Wow.
looking at healing and promotion of health rather than illness, rather
Mm,
than the medical model. So the medical model says you have a disease and we have to treat the disease. But this approach is the person's name is Antonovsky, and I talked about him in my book several
yeah.
times. So he believed that we have to promote mental health and well-being in the way we approach disorders rather than diseases. So a disorder to me is dis hyphen order rather than a disease. That's how I
Mm,
look at it.
mm,
So you don't have order, in other words, and that you're off balance. So he was very famous for this. He wrote his initial book in the 1970s, and then there was another very large book written after, years after he wrote the initial one. I think it was 2022, on salutogenesis and how it affects people in communities, right?
right.
So it's a medical model, for instance, for mental disorders in the diagnostic and statistical manual is about, well, how do we treat this disease? And it can almost make it the disease of the brain. Matter of fact, there was a whole decade, the 1990s, to 2000, they called it the decade of the brain. And they did research, brain research, and neuroscientists were going to figure out like the cause of schizophrenia and, in an area of the brain. But we know that the brain is not the subconscious mind. There's no anatomical structure of the subconscious mind, but there is the anatomical structure, of course, of the brain and the skull. So we can't just say it's about the brain. There are all kinds of connections. There's the amygdala that they are finding out about. So we have to look at it from the perspective of what I call primary prevention. Now, if you want to look at prevention, there are 3 levels. And I learned this when I was studying for my master's degree in public administration. And the first level, it's called primary prevention. If you want to look at it like somebody who has lung cancer, right? So primary prevention would be to prevent the lung cancer from occurring. In other words, you don't smoke, you don't inhale fumes like that. Yeah. Secondary prevention would be detection. So you have to go, if you smoke, I just heard an ad on the radio yesterday saying, no, this is to prevent lung cancer. You have to go get your screening, right? If you smoked. So that's secondary detection. Get your X-ray or your testing in the lab. Then the third form of prevention would be to prevent the cancer from spreading after you already have it, right? So now you have it in your lungs and you don't want it spread to your brain and to your liver and all these places. But we very often forget those levels of prevention, and we think that we don't even have to work with primary. We only work with, well, your daughter is in the emergency room and has suicidal ideation. I guess we should do a risk assessment now, and what kind of treatment should she have so it doesn't get worse and eventually commit suicide. That's secondary, tertiary. But I work with prevention, and that's what they're talking about there. Salutogenesis is not the medical model or pathological disease, because especially challenges with the brain, challenges with mental health, it's not a test that you can take. You can't take a test to show you have schizophrenia. It may show changes in the brain because you have schizophrenia, but it's not going to be the determining factor. It's not the cause of it. It may be the result of having schizophrenia for many years that you find something in the brain. So that's the challenge with society. And that's why I say mindful toughness techniques that I teach promote mental health and prevent mental illness later on, because you become more resilient. You know what to do to help yourself and even to heal. So that's where I think my viewpoint is very different than most healthcare professionals who are connected with the medical model. That's an old concept from the 1600s. Descartes, the philosopher, said the mind and body are separate. And I still see that existence today.
Yeah. So we're almost at the end. Gosh, let me see if I went through everything. Oh, yes. So there's something else that you talked about. Yeah, the great news is that for those with limited resources, that we can reverse the statistics of how poverty negatively impacts young people who have multiple ACEs from childhood.
Yes, ACEs, they're called. Yes, and that's the trauma from childhood. And you think because you grow up in a poverty-stricken area and you have low income and socioeconomic situation is poor, that you're going to grow up to be in poverty, or maybe to be a criminal, or maybe to be, commit homicides, because the ACEs, 4 or more, are related to that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that will come true. That's not predictive of it. And neither is having a lot of money predictive of happiness in life. Right? So those things are very important to know, and that you can change even the genes, how the genes affect you in your life by working with the power of the mind, you have control over them to some extent, not totally. Like if you have, a gene deletion, you'll have those symptoms of that, but you can help yourself so that it's not predictive. It's like even if you have challenges with the heart condition, and your father and your grandfather and your great grandfather died of a heart attack, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you'll have a heart attack and die from that, because there are things you can do to help yourself to prevent it.
Yes. You see,
Mm-hmm.
that's it brings not just a feeling of empowerment, because then now we
Yes.
know that we can do something about it individually. We don't
Yes.
have to wait for something to happen, or be afraid. Fear, I think, plays a role too. It doesn't
Yes.
help, right, Christine, to be
Yes.
afraid.
Well, fear plays a big role. And I think we saw that in the election that we were just talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's another
Mm-hmm.
factor. Gosh, we have to do an interview about fear alone. Talk about
Yes.
fear, how
Fear
it
itself.
impacts
Mm-hmm.
everything, mental health and
Yes.
physical health, spiritual health. So, yes, is there anything that you left unsaid? I do have the final thoughts here, but is there anything that you want to disclose for this conversation, Christine, that I have not asked you questions for?
Well, we discussed a little earlier about my experience in the visiting nurse service,
Mm,
and also how I was taken to Yankee Stadium when I
yeah,
was a child, and how thrilled I was. But I didn't know how that was going to affect my life later on, when I was at the Yankee Stadium subway station and a homeless person approached me and followed me out to the outdoor phone during a storm. The wind
yeah,
was blowing, it was raining. He was on the phone, and he said that the money I put in the phone was his, which of course it wasn't. I was trying to call my supervisor at the end of the day. So he hauled off and he punched me in the face.
God,
And that caused, I would say, a little disruption. He knocked off my glasses. I thought my nose was broken because of the power. It was like a home run for sure, hitting my face. And I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot also to be very cautious in the area at the time in the South Bronx, because there was this social worker who was murdered there. And in the little
God,
bodega window, it said wanted for the murder of the social worker. So it wasn't as if this was the safest place, but I felt I was doing my job, and I actually loved it, to help the people in the community. So from that, I learned things about how people lived in the community. Like the
yeah,
little boy I visited who had scabies, and I was there to assess his health. And the grandmother was taking care of these 5 children. He had 4 older siblings, and she was fearful of what was happening on the street. And and the whole house was very clean, because I had to assess that, the conditions. So it wasn't as if she was dirty or she saved garbage in her
okay,
house. But these rats came up from the wall and into her apartment, even to take the morsels of food out of the little boy's pocket that he put on the chair next to him when he went to sleep. He had a cracker in there. And so all these rats were outside when she called me to the window, and I couldn't believe how many thousands of rats were down there 5 floors below me. And I tried to report it to the city of New York, and it took me weeks because there were so many phone calls. And what I want to point out is, if we don't work on the health of our children, teens, and young adults early on, this is a call to action, the
mm,
same thing will occur. And it might take us 60 to 110 years as predicted. But I noticed just 2 weekends ago, when I went to the New York City Marathon, I was walking down 75th Street, and there's this little rat. It was going
oh
from
no,
garbage pail to garbage pail.
yeah,
And I said to my husband, see, symbolically, the rats are still here and they're betraying us, like in the, you dirty rat, you, that the whole expression. So we
yeah,
have to look at it now to help ourselves, because the conditions will not change unless we help them to change. Talking about teaching empathy,
mm,
compassion to our children, and what to do, and let them make some mistakes, because that's how they're going to learn. The strongest storms
mm,
make the best sailors. So
mm,
we have to be conscious of that and help them, because how else are they going to learn what to do? to be resilient.
Yes, a billion times. Yeah, to that truth. Wow. We'll end with that. It's not just beautifully said, but it's wisdom. I just hear that, and I keep saying that because it's the voice of wisdom. So you know how the past influence the now and the future. So it's all connected. So we need to become aware of that. And the earlier,
Yes.
the better.
The earlier the better, definitely.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you so much, Christine, for being you.
Oh, you're
Thank
welcome.
you. Yeah. So I want to mention also, so you have lots of services to offer besides your book. That's on Amazon. I'll have the link here. You offer a free ebook too, which I have the link as well. Start
Yes.
unlocking your child's potential, 6 game-changing points for sports success. And then,
Yes.
well, I wanted to ask you a question about one-on-one sessions. Do you host group sessions
I
or?
do group. I've done many group sessions. I work one on one as well. I work in my office in Oakland, New Jersey, but I also work online, especially since the pandemic, doing more and more work online and to people all over the country and all over the world. So you can tune in and get the same benefits, and get in the zone, learn how to get in the zone no matter what. Right.
Uh,
So, and that's very enlightening, but I do work with groups. I've worked with whole teams, like whole wrestling teams, and children at school, tell them this is what you can do when you're scared, things like that. So, yes, and I also give keynote addresses. I've been all over the world. I'm giving presentations to nurses, peak performance coaches, and also history, being a published historian.
oh yeah,
Mhm.
yes.
And that's at the Summit Center for Ideal Performance. And you can access it through my websites, idealperformance.net and
Mm,
also drchristinesilverstein.com, which, by the way, Valeria, people can look at, the listeners here can look at my
yeah,
drchristinesilverstein.com website and see the wonderful narration that we did with a baseball player, George, and Carlton, who wanted to go to camp, and also
yeah.
Jerry, the wrestler. So you can
Mm,
look at that right on that site, and they're very amazing, and very successful, making this little boy who's so scared to be at bat to become a Cooperstown Hall of Famer, after he listened to my recording at the
oh my
baseball
God.
game.
How amazing. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. It's your heart is just so beautiful and so open. It's just so giving that that's the result. Whoever is open to receive will
Yes.
benefit greatly from it.
Yes, and you can. It's even if you don't believe, you can still have
Yes.
good results. That's the beauty of it, because that's the power of the subconscious mind. Hmm.
Yes, yes, yeah. It doesn't depend on belief systems. Yes.
Hmm.
So I'll have all those links will be clickable here on the podcast notes, so it's easy to just access. Thank you so much again, Christine, for your presence in our world, in
Yes,
my life, in everybody else's life who can be touched by you.
yes.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you for the opportunity. I
Um,
appreciate it to
yeah.
spread the good news globally.
Yes, the good news. I love that. I actually have great news here. Yeah, and it is. Thank you again, Christine. Bye for now, my
You're
dear.
welcome.
Bye.